Were there any big, as you said, it was kind of decades that started to stack on top of each other as far as your involvement and you giving back. But were there any big catalyst moments? Because I mean, you're a well-known actor. You had Forrest Gump. You had all these big movies. But as you reflect back, were there any like singular moments where you look at like, whoa, that really sparked me to double down on this and really give back?
Yeah, there were a few. I document them. I wrote a book in 2019 called Grateful American, and I these were important moments, so I document them extensively in the book. One was shortly after Forrest Gump opened. Um, it was a big hit and got a lot of attention and everything like that. And I was playing a wounded veteran, Vietnam veteran, Lieutenant Dan, and I received a call from the Disabled American Veterans Organization uh, shortly after the movie opened, and they invited me to come to their national convention. They wanted to present me with an award for playing Lieutenant Dan. And I didn't know what the DAV was. I did some research on the double amputation because I was playing a double amputee. So I did some research on that and spoke to some, wounded service members who had the same injury, but I didn't learn about the DAV. I didn't know anything about them. And so it's the Disabled American Veterans Organization. They had, at the time, they had 1.5 million wounded veterans as a part of their organization. Been around for years and years. It's over 100 years old now. And they invited me to come, and I remember they took me. It was at the Conrad Hilton in Chicago, and I was in a hotel room up above, and they brought me down through the kitchen to the ballroom, and I was standing in the back behind these doors, getting ready to go out in the ballroom. They said they held me there, and I could hear my voice on the video screen screaming at the hurricane. Remember, there's a scene with Lieutenant Dan, and he's up on the boat on the mast, and he's screaming at the hurricane, and he's saying, "Come on, give me everything you got. I can take it," and all that. It's a great scene, and that was being played in the ballroom, and then they introduced me to come out, and I came out on stage, and I looked out there, and it was a ballroom filled with 2,500, 3,000 people, fully two-thirds, maybe 2,000 wounded veterans in the audience. I mean, it was incredible, going all the way back to World War II. At that time, this was 1994, and they were applauding and cheering, and those who could stand up, were standing up, and other people were in wheelchairs banging on their seats and clapping. They were cheering me for playing this part in a movie, and I was really caught off guard by it. I knew what, by the time I got there, I had done some research and found out what the DAV was, but I was not prepared for the emotion that kind of raced across me, standing there looking at all these wounded veterans cheering for me. And that was a galvanizing moment at that point. And I stayed very, very actively involved with the DAV, have all this time, all 30 years now, have been very, very actively involved with the DAV. And I play their national convention every year with my band and all of that. So that's been an important relationship. And I would say 9/11 was the other big turning point for me. And another galvanizing moment toward taking action and serving in a much deeper and more active capacity. I think everything that had happened, the veterans in my own family, working with Vietnam veterans in the 80s in Chicago, starting to work with wounded veterans in the 90s because of Lieutenant Dan, and all of that has just teed up this motivation in me to try to do something to help the men and women who were deploying in reaction to what had happened on September 11, 2001. And people started raising their hands and volunteering and going out and joining the service. And and we started having people getting hurt and getting killed, and I just couldn't sit back and do nothing. So it turned me toward a greater action that eventually just manifested itself into the creation of my own nonprofit organization, the Gary Sinise Foundation.
And what year was that when it was officially founded?
I started getting after September 11th, I started getting involved with multiple nonprofits. One of the first things I did, I'm an actor, so what do? You volunteer for the USO. And so I started visiting troops all over the place, going to the war zones. And my first trips to Iraq were in 2003. And, I just was going on trips all the time and volunteering. Then I got a TV series, CSI New York. So I would try to find ways that I could carve in trips to military bases on the weekends. And I would take my band, and I was doing all that kind of stuff. Um, and at the same time volunteering for a lot of other service organizations besides the USO. There was one called Hope for the Warriors, and I mean, there's the DAV, of course. There's too many. They're too numerous to mention. But I got involved with first responders. I went to New York City and started supporting organizations there, the Fire Family Transport Foundation, Friends of Firefighters, all these organizations that were supporting the first responders in New York. And of course, we all know how many were lost there that terrible day. I started supporting them in various ways. So multiple years of just supporting a lot of different organizations that sort of eventually just told me that the next big step for me would be to create my own support nonprofit. And that's when the Gary Sinise Foundation was created, and we launched it publicly in 2011. So we're 14 years in now.
And Gary, so post 9/11, it sounds like things really picked up for you, and your kind of calling became more and more obvious to you. But at the same time, having done some research on you, I mean, you were like I said, a well-known actor. As you said, you're offering your time. You're traveling to these war zones. You're going to Iraq, Germany, Italy. How did you balance all of those things while still raising a family? And is that something, as you reflect back on now, and honestly, I'm asking for personal reasons, because I think it's anything, as somebody who has passions and has these callings, which I do, and have now a third one on the way with two under 3 years old. It's something, as a father, you try to balance internally and know, like, where is that point? And I think for each individual, it probably lies somewhere different. So there's definitely no one size fits all, and there's no blanket answer to it. But from your experience and having gone through it, like, how were you balancing those things? And as you reflect on that, was that a challenge to you, or was it obvious that, like, no, these are the things that I need to do right now?
It was a challenge, and it was a sacrifice on the part of my family, because again, as I said, on my wife's side of the family, there are Vietnam veterans. And my wife was all too aware of what happened to our Vietnam veterans when they came home from war and they didn't get the support they deserved. And, they kind of fell into the shadows. Her brother, she had two brothers, and her sister's husband, combat medic. They all served in Vietnam. I learned a great deal from them back in the 70s and 80s about what it was like to go off and serve and then come home to a divided nation, a nation that was spitting on them when they came home. It was a terrible time to be a veteran, and many of our Vietnam veterans just disappeared into the shadows. So my wife was well aware of what happened to them, and now we have a new generation raising their hand, going off to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it became a bit controversial. If you remember, I mean, the country was kind of galvanized after the attack, and folks were, wanted something to be done. We were all looking for, what are the ways that we can kind of exercise this pain that we have inside of us. A lot of people raised their hand and went to war. Um, well, I wasn't going to go to war, but I had a broken heart, and I felt a lot of pain for what had happened to our country and to what had happened to the families of people that were killed that day. And I had a lot of empathy for those that were going to war now, and those families that were starting to lose loved ones, and people who were starting to get banged up and end up in the hospitals. I started visiting the hospitals early on, way back when we first started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing a lot of wounded folks. And so my wife was all too keen on me doing whatever I could to support. So the family was behind me, and if they were not, if it was like, oh, do you have to go on another trip, and can't you just stay home, and you know don't you feel like you've done it already, you've been on all these trips. Well, it was something that was becoming a very regular part of my life, just to do everything I could throughout that period of time, to make sure that our defenders in Afghanistan and Iraq would not start feeling like our Vietnam veterans did when they went off the war, and the nation was divided. And I could see that kind of thing happening. If you recall, there was a lot of, the media and did not like George Bush. They were just on his case all the time about the war and all this stuff. People were getting hurt. And I didn't want the men and women who were deploying to fall into these cracks. I didn't want them to, what happened to our Vietnam veterans, to happen to them, to where they would get caught in this division over whether or not we should be there or not. I just wanted to support them. If they were going to be there, then I wanted to go be there as much as I could with them, and I wanted to support other organizations that were doing the same thing that I wanted to do, which is make sure that they know they're appreciated and that there are services available to them when they come home and throughout their deployments. So I started sending school supplies. I mean, you can look up the history. There was a program we started in 2004 called Operation Iraqi Children. It started off with Iraq, where we started shipping thousands of school supply kits to the troops. And they would load up their trucks and go on a convoy and go on some mission. And they would have all these school supplies in the trucks. And maybe they were pulling into a hostile village, that some place that was maybe going to be dangerous, but they would pull over and open the truck up, pull the boxes out, and start handing the supplies out. And all of a sudden, the temperature just came down in the village, and more and more people started to come out to grab those supplies, and Operation Iraqi Children became a very big hearts and minds campaign. And we started shipping to Afghanistan and Djibouti and Haiti, places where our troops were deploying. Remember the big earthquake in Haiti? Just awful. We sent a lot of troops down there, and we shipped school supplies to them so they could take them and give them to the kids. These programs were very, very beneficial, and a part of what led to the creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation. Just entertainment, support for children, support for the children of our fallen heroes through an organization I got involved with years ago called Snowball Express, that is now a big program at the Gary Sinise Foundation, where we take care of the children of our fallen, not only our fallen military heroes, but our fallen first responders. So all this so much was going on back then. And, again, I do the audio book of Grateful American. You can always grab it and listen. And I tell the story of how I got so involved in all of this stuff. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to do. And the more my family saw me doing it, they made the sacrifices. Do I wish there were moments with my children that I had back and that I don't have because I was gone on some trip or I was shooting some show or something? Yeah, of course. But all my kids they're wonderful, and they see the fruits of all that labor. in the Gary Sinise Foundation, and the millions and millions of dollars that we've raised and deployed all over the place to help people, and they're proud of it.